The Curious Republic of Gondour by Twain. As soon as I had learned to speak the language a little, I became greatly interested in the people and the system of government. I found that the nation had at first tried universal suffrage pure and simple, but had thrown that form aside because the result was not satisfactory. It had seemed to deliver all power into the hands of the ignorant and non-tax-paying classes, and of a necessity, the responsible offices were filled from these classes also. A remedy was sought. The people believed they had found it, not in the destruction of universal suffrage, but in the enlargement of it. It was an odd idea and ingenious. You must understand, the Constitution gave every man a vote, therefore that vote was a vested right and could not be taken away. But the Constitution 999 not say that certain individuals might not be given 2 votes, or 10. So an amendatory clause was inserted in a quiet way, a clause which authorized the enlargement of the suffrage in certain cases to be specified by statute. To offer to limit the suffrage might have made instant trouble. The offer to enlarge, it had a pleasant aspect. But of course the newspapers soon began to suspect, and then out they came. It was found, however, that for once, and for the first time in the history of the Republic, property, character, and intellect were able to wield a political influence. For once, money, virtue, and intelligence took a vital and a united interest in a political question. For once these powers went to the primaries in strong force. For once the best men in the nation were put forward as candidates for that parliament, whose business it should be to enlarge the suffrage. The weightiest half of the press quickly joined forces with the new movement, and left the other half to rail about the proposed destruction of the liberties of the bottom layer of society, the hitherto governing class of the community. The victory was complete. The new law was framed and passed. Under it every citizen, howsoever poor or ignorant, possessed 1 vote, so universal suffrage still reigned. But if a man possessed a good common school education and no money, he had 2 votes. A high school education gave him 4. If he had property likewise to the value of 3,000 sacos, he wielded 1 more vote. For every 50,000 sacos a man added to his property, he was entitled to another vote. A university education entitled a man to 9 votes, even though he owned no property. Therefore, learning being more prevalent and more easily acquired than riches, educated men became a wholesome check upon wealthy men, since they could outvote them. Learning goes usually with uprightness, broad views, and humanity. So the learned voters, possessing the balance of power, became the vigilant and efficient protectors of the great lower rank of society. And now a curious thing developed itself, a sort of emulation, whose object was voting power. Whereas formerly a man was honored only according to the amount of money he possessed, his grandeur was measured now by the number of votes he wielded. A man with only 1 vote was conspicuously respectful to his neighbor who possessed 3. And if he was a man above the commonplace, he was as conspicuously energetic in his determination to acquire 3 for himself. This spirit of emulation invaded all ranks. Votes based upon capital were commonly called mortal votes, because they could be lost. Those based upon learning were called immortal, because they were permanent, and because of their customarily imperishable character, they were naturally more valued than the other sort. I say customarily for the reason that these votes were not absolutely imperishable, since insanity could suspend them. Under this system, gambling and speculation almost ceased in the Republic. A man honored as the possessor of great voting power could not afford to risk the loss of it upon a doubtful chance. It was curious to observe the manners and customs which the enlargement plan produced. Walking the street with a friend one day, he delivered a careless bow to a passerby, and then remarked that that person possessed only 1 vote and would probably never earn another. He was more respectful to the next acquaintance he met. He explained that this salute was a 4-vote bow. I tried to average the importance of the people he accosted after that by the nature of his bows, but my success was only partial, because of the somewhat greater homage paid to the immortals than to the mortals. My friend explained. He said there was no law to regulate this thing, except that most powerful of all laws, custom. Custom had created these varying bows, and in time they had become easy and natural. At this moment he delivered himself of a very profound salute, and then said, Now there's a man who began life as a shoemaker's apprentice, and without education. Now he swings 22 mortal votes and 2 immortal ones. He expects to pass a high school examination this year and climb a couple of votes higher among the immortals, mighty valuable citizen. By and by my friend met a venerable personage, and not only made him a most elaborate bow, but also took off his hat. I took off mine, too, with a mysterious awe. I was beginning to be infected. What grandee is that? That is our most illustrious astronomer. He hasn't any money, but is fearfully learned. 9 immortals is his political weight. He would swing 150 votes if our system were perfect. Is there any altitude of mere, moneyed grandeur that you take off your hat to? No, 9 immortal votes is the only power we uncover for, that is, in 153 life. Very great officials receive that mark of homage, of course. It was common to hear people admiringly mention men who had begun life on the lower levels and in time achieved great voting power. It was also common to hear youths planning a future of ever so many votes for themselves. I heard shrewd mammas speak of certain young men as good catches, because they possessed such and such a number of votes. I knew of more than one case where an heiress was married to a youngster who had but 1 vote, the argument being that he was gifted with such excellent parts that in time he would acquire a good voting strength, and perhaps in the long run be able to outvote his wife, if he had luck. Competitive examinations were the rule and in all official grades. I remarked that the questions asked the candidates were wild, intricate, and often required a sort of knowledge not needed in the office sought. Can a fool or an ignoramus answer them? Asked the person I was talking with. Certainly not. Well, you will not find any fools or ignoramuses among our officials. I felt rather cornered, but made shift to say, but these questions cover a good deal more ground than is necessary. No matter. If candidates can answer these, it is tolerably fair evidence that they can answer nearly any other question you choose to ask them. There were some things in Gondour which one could not shut his eyes to. One was that ignorance and incompetence had no place in the government. Brains and property managed the state. A candidate for office must have marked ability, education, and high character, or he stood no sort of chance of election. If a hod-carrier possessed these, he could succeed, but the mere fact that he was a hod-carrier could not elect him, as in previous times. It was now a very great honor to be in the Parliament, or in office. Under the old system, such distinction had only brought suspicion upon a man, and made him a helpless mark for newspaper contempt and scurrility. Officials 999 not need to steal now, their salaries being vast in comparison with the pittances paid in the days when parliaments were created by hod-carriers, who viewed official salaries from a hod-carrying point of view, and compelled that view to be respected by their obsequious servants. Justice was wisely and rigidly administered, for a judge, after once reaching his place through the specified line of promotions, was a permanency during good behavior. He was not obliged to modify his judgments according to the effect they might have upon the temper of a reigning political party. The country was mainly governed by a ministry which went out with the administration that created it. This was also the case with the chiefs of the great departments. Minor officials ascended to their several positions through well-earned promotions, and not by a jump from gin mills or the needy families and friends of members of Parliament. Good behavior measured their terms of office. The head of the government, the Grand Caliph, was elected for a term of 20 years. I questioned the wisdom of this. I was answered that he could do no harm, since the ministry and the Parliament governed the land, and he was liable to impeachment for misconduct. This great office had twice been ably filled by women as aptly fitted for it as some of the sceptred queens of history. Members of the cabinet, under many administrations, had been women. I found that the pardoning power was lodged in a court of pardons, consisting of several great judges. Under the old regime, this important power was vested in a single official, and he usually took care to have a general jail delivery in time for the next election. I inquired about public schools. There were plenty of them and of free colleges, too. I inquired about compulsory education. This was received with a smile and the remark, "When a man's child is able to make himself powerful and honored according to the amount of education he acquires, don't you suppose that that parent will apply the compulsion himself? Our free schools and free colleges require no law to fill them." There was a loving pride of country about this person's way of speaking which annoyed me. I had long been unused to the sound of it in my own. The Gondour national airs were forever dinning in my ears. Therefore I was glad to leave that country and come back to my dear native land, where one never hears that sort of music.